Have you ever been handed a single dollar in front of your entire family, while your sister was handed 12.8 million? Not metaphorically. Not less love. Not subtle favoritism. An actual dollar bill. Folded once. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Pressed into your palm. And then your mother smiles and says, "For bus fare. You'll need it." Would you laugh? Cry? Walk out? Or would you stand perfectly still while the room fills with applause for someone else? Because that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Elena Whitmore. I'm 28 years old. I teach high school English on the north side of Chicago. I make $54,000 a year before taxes. I rent a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery that smells like cinnamon at 5 a.m. And 3 months ago, I sat in a mahogany conference room and watched my older sister become a multimillionaire. Her name is Victoria Whitmore. She's 31. A luxury lifestyle influencer. 500,000 followers. Designer handbags categorized by season. A brand manager. A ring light that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. She's the golden child. I'm the quiet one. That's how it's always been. Our father, Richard Whitmore, is 60. Corporate tax attorney. Precision suits. Precision words. Precision disappointment. Our mother, Diane Whitmore, 58, former regional beauty pageant winner. Still introduces herself that way sometimes. She believes presentation is everything. Perception is reality. And some children shine brighter. Guess which one she thinks shines. But the real center of this story isn't my parents. It's my grandfather, Arthur Whitmore. 87 when he passed. Self-made commercial real estate investor. Started with a 2-flat in Cicero in 1972. Turned it into a $40 million portfolio over 4 decades. He never bragged. Never posted. Never performed wealth. He believed money should move quietly. He also believed people revealed themselves when they thought no one important was watching. Growing up, Victoria got private school tuition. I got told to apply for scholarships. Victoria got a BMW at 18. I got my mom's old Honda with the cracked mirror. Victoria's college apartment was paid in full. I worked at a bookstore and tutored freshmen who partied too much. And yet, Grandpa Arthur slipped me envelopes every semester. Not big ones. Just enough to cover textbooks. Once he told me, the loudest person in the room rarely owns it. I didn't understand that at 20. I understand it now. The will reading was held at Whitmore and Hale Law offices in downtown Chicago. 42nd floor. Glass windows. Gray sky pressing against the skyline like it wanted in on the gossip. Victoria arrived in a white Chanel blazer. White. To a will reading. My mother kissed her cheek and whispered, "Your grandfather always knew you had star quality." I arrived alone. No one hugged me. The lawyer, Martin Hale, 55, composed and meticulous, adjusted his glasses and began reading. His voice was neutral, professional, controlled. When he said Victoria's name, the room leaned forward. 6.4 million in commercial property. 3.1 million investment account. 2.3 million municipal bonds. Lake Geneva vacation home valued at $1 million. Total estimated value, $12.8 million. There was actual applause. Applause. I remember the sound echoing off the conference walls. I remember Victoria pretending to cry. I remember my father nodding like he personally engineered the outcome. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. To my granddaughter, Elena Whitmore. Silence. A pause long enough to feel intentional. And before the lawyer could finish the sentence, my mother reached into her purse. She pulled out a single dollar bill. Crisp. Almost theatrical. She stood, walked toward me, and placed it into my hand. "For bus fare," she said sweetly. "You'll need it." Laughter. Not just a chuckle. Full laughter. Cousins. An uncle. Even Victoria covered her mouth like it was the most charming joke she'd ever heard. In that moment, something strange happened. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel small. I felt watched. Not by them. By the lawyer. Because Martin Hale wasn't laughing. He was staring at me. Studying my face. Waiting. For what? For me to react? To cry? To argue? To storm out? But I didn't move. I closed my fingers around the dollar. And I sat there. That's when he said it. There is one additional item. My mother laughed again. Oh good, maybe she gets a subway card too. But Martin Hale wasn't smiling. He reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. Thick cream paper. My grandfather's handwriting across the front. To be opened only if both granddaughters are present. The room shifted. You could feel it. The air changed temperature. Victoria stopped smiling. My father leaned forward. And for the first time that afternoon, my mother's expression flickered. Just slightly. Because something about that envelope didn't look like a joke. And what happened when it was opened? Well, that's when my mother stopped laughing. Have you ever walked into a room and realized everyone else had rehearsed a scene you didn't know you were in? That's what the will reading felt like. But the performance didn't start in that conference room. It started 3 days earlier. 3 days before Grandpa Arthur's will was read, Victoria posted a photo on Instagram. Champagne flute. Caption: Big week ahead. Manifesting abundance. At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now, it feels like foreshadowing. The night before the reading, my parents hosted a small family dinner. Victoria showed up glowing. Not grieving. Not reflective. Glowing. My father barely touched his food. He kept checking his phone. At one point, he stepped outside to take a call. I didn't mean to overhear him when I went to refill my water, but the patio door was cracked. Yes, he said quietly. The transfer will be immediate. We've already structured it that way. Structured what? When he came back inside, he saw me near the door. He paused just a second too long before smiling. Elena, he said, overly casual, you'll be there tomorrow, right? I wasn't planning not to be. Good, my mother chimed in quickly. You should see what success looks like. See what success looks like. Not share in it. See it. That sentence sat in my stomach like cold metal. Later that night, Victoria cornered me in the kitchen. You okay? She asked, but her tone wasn't concern. It was curiosity. Like she was checking how a prop was holding up before opening night. I'm fine, I said. She tilted her head. Just remember. Grandpa appreciated drive. It wasn't what she said. It was how confidently she said it. Like she already knew the ending. And that's when I remembered something from 2 weeks before Grandpa died. I visited him alone at the hospital. He was thinner. Quieter. But his eyes were sharp as ever. He squeezed my hand and said, numbers can lie. Paper doesn't. I didn't understand. I thought he was talking about contracts. Or taxes. Or one of his endless real estate lectures. Now I wonder if he was warning me. Because when Martin Hale opened that second envelope in the conference room, his hands didn't shake. But my mother's smile did. He unfolded the document carefully. I am now reading an addendum signed 11 days prior to Arthur Whitmore's passing. My father stiffened. I was unaware of any addendum. Martin didn't look at him. It was filed directly with my office. Victoria crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. Martin continued. To whichever of my granddaughters shows patience in humiliation. The room went completely still. No one breathed. To whichever granddaughter accepts what appears to be little, without protest. I leave the responsibility of stewardship. My mother let out a small laugh. Arthur always did love theatrics. But her voice had lost its shine. Martin adjusted his glasses and kept reading. The public allocation of visible assets is not the full extent of my estate. Visible assets. My father leaned forward. What does that mean? Martin turned a page. It means, he said calmly, that the distribution you've just heard is only partial. Victoria's face shifted. Just slightly. Confusion first. Then irritation. Then something sharper. Go on, she snapped. Martin nodded. In parallel to the previously stated allocations, I established an independent entity 11 years ago. 11 years. That would have made me 17. Whitmore Strategic Holdings, LLC. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. Martin's eyes finally lifted from the page. Sole managing member and beneficiary, Elena Whitmore. The room didn't gasp. It froze. Like someone had pulled the oxygen out. My father blinked. That's not possible. It is, Martin replied evenly. Victoria laughed once. Short. Sharp. How much? Not, what is it? Not, why? Just how much? Martin glanced down again. Initial valuation at time of signing, $18.4 million. This time, there was no applause. No laughter. No smirking. Just silence so thick it pressed against my ribs. 18.4 million. More than what Victoria had just received. More than what my parents clearly expected. And then Martin added something that changed the temperature in the room entirely. These assets were never publicly tied to Arthur Whitmore's name. They are layered through holding companies and private equity placements. My father's face had gone pale. You're saying? He started slowly, we didn't know about this. That is correct. Victoria stood up abruptly. This has to be a mistake. It isn't. And that's when Martin said the line that made my mother finally stop pretending this was a joke. The dollar was symbolic. Symbolic. My fingers tightened around the bill still in my hand. If Elena had rejected it, Martin continued, or publicly protested the allocation, control of Whitmore Strategic Holdings would have transferred to the Whitmore Foundation. Charity. The humiliation wasn't random. It was a test. A deliberate one. Designed by a man who understood exactly how this family operated. And suddenly I realized something chilling. Grandpa hadn't just divided money. He had staged a demonstration. And the performance wasn't over. Because Martin hadn't even reached the final clause yet. What if the dollar wasn't the insult? What if it was the trigger? That's the thought that hit me as Martin Hale turned the page. Because $18.4 million was already enough to flip the room upside down. But Grandpa Arthur never did anything halfway. Martin's voice stayed level. Measured. Almost clinical. Whitmore Strategic Holdings LLC currently maintains diversified assets across commercial real estate, private equity, and venture placements. My father interrupted. Be specific. Martin didn't even glance at him. 40% silent stake in 3 Class A office towers in downtown Chicago. I knew those towers. Everyone in Chicago knew them. Glass facades. Prime tenants. Long-term leases. Estimated valuation, just over $22 million collectively. 40% of that wasn't pocket change. Victoria slowly sat back down. Martin continued. Controlling shares in 2 medical technology startups. Combined current valuation, $6.7 million. Medical tech. That wasn't random. Grandpa always said healthcare real estate and innovation were recession-resistant. Cash liquidity of approximately $2.2 million. My mother whispered, this is insane. But Martin kept going. Royalties from patented land use agreements in DuPage County. I blinked. That explains something. 10 years ago, Grandpa had quietly acquired farmland near a logistics corridor. Everyone thought he'd overpaid. He hadn't. He negotiated mineral and access rights before the zoning change. Paper doesn't lie. That's what he meant. These assets, Martin finished, were structured through layered holding companies over the past 11 years. They are not contestable under the primary estate. My father's jaw tightened. Why would he hide this? Martin finally looked at him. He didn't hide it. He separated it. Separated. Victoria's voice came out thin. From what? From influence. The word hung there. Influence. Grandpa knew exactly how this family worked. Visible money. Flashy assets. Applause. And then quiet control. But Martin wasn't done. There is an operational clause. Of course there was. He adjusted the document. While Victoria Whitmore is named beneficiary of the $12.8 million in publicly declared assets, those assets are held in a revocable trust. Victoria straightened. So, Martin said calmly, the trust's managing authority falls under Whitmore Strategic Holdings LLC. The room shifted again. Slowly. Like dominoes tipping in silence. I felt it before I understood it. Whitmore Strategic Holdings. The company I now owned. Martin clarified. Effective immediately, Elena Whitmore holds controlling managerial authority over the trust that governs Victoria Whitmore's distributions. Victoria stared at him. then at me, then back at him. That doesn't make sense, she said. Dad is trustee. Co-trustee, Martin corrected. Operational decisions require majority control from the managing entity, which was me. My father's voice lowered. Dangerous. Are you saying she controls access to the 12.8 million? Yes. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Let that sink in. The applause from 10 minutes earlier now felt like it belonged to another universe. My mother's face had drained of color. Victoria's lips parted slightly, like she was trying to compute a language she didn't speak. And then Martin delivered the final line of the addendum. The symbolic offering of $1 serves as confirmation of character under public scrutiny. Should Elena Whitmore accept without protest, her controlling authority is activated. Should she reject or contest, all parallel holdings transfer immediately to the Whitmore Foundation. I looked down at my hand. The dollar was still there. Crisp. Unfolded now. Unrejected. Activated. Grandpa hadn't been humiliating me. He had been calibrating me. Testing for impulse. Testing for ego. Testing whether I would need applause. Victoria leaned toward me slowly. You knew about this? I shook my head. Because I hadn't. But Grandpa had known about her. About my parents. About influence. About pressure. About pride. My father stood up abruptly. We can challenge this. Martin didn't flinch. You can attempt to, he said evenly. However, contesting the addendum freezes all trust assets for 5 years pending litigation. Additionally, the challenge would trigger the dissolution clause redirecting $18.4 million to charity. 5 years. Frozen money. Public litigation. Victoria's brand deals wouldn't survive 5 months without visible liquidity. My mother spoke carefully now. No sarcasm. No performance. Elena, sweetheart, this is complicated. Complicated. That was one word for it. Victoria's voice trembled for the first time in her adult life. So what? She just decides when I get my money? Martin corrected her again. She decides how. How? Not if. Grandpa hadn't disinherited Victoria. He had structured her. There's a difference. I felt something strange settle inside me. Not triumph. Not revenge. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the comparison. I wasn't the quiet daughter in the background. I was the gatekeeper. And the most unsettling part? Grandpa had designed it that way 11 years ago. When I was 17. Before Victoria's influencer career. Before the boutique failure. Before the credit card debt no one talked about. He had seen trajectories. And he had made a bet. On me. Victoria's eyes locked onto mine. You think you won? She whispered. Won? That's when I understood something critical. This wasn't about winning. It was about responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than humiliation. But what happened after we left that office? When the cameras were off, the lawyer was gone, and the doors were closed. That's when the real shift began. And no one in that room was ready for it. What happens when the invisible daughter becomes the gatekeeper? That's the question everyone in that room hadn't yet considered. The first moments after the will reading felt like a haze of stunned silence. Victoria's usual confidence was gone. She sat frozen, staring at the table like it had suddenly betrayed her. My parents were whispering frantically to each other, their earlier performance completely stripped away. And me? I was holding $1 in my hand and realizing for the first time that it represented far more than just bus fare. The ride home was tense. My father tried to initiate a conversation in the back seat of the black sedan. Elena, you don't understand. This could be a clerical error, he said, voice low. I turned toward him, my gaze steady. It's not an error. Grandpa wouldn't make an error on something this deliberate. He sighed, frustrated, and glanced at my mother. Diane's eyes were fixed on the window, a sheen of panic hiding behind her usual composure. We need to talk, she said finally. But the words had no power, they weren't directives anymore. When we arrived home, Victoria immediately tried to negotiate. Elena, look, we can split this evenly. You don't have to control everything. It's family. Come on, Mom, Dad, she's being unreasonable. I didn't flinch. It's already split evenly, I said quietly. You just don't control how it's distributed. The weight of that statement hit her like a punch. Her jaw tightened. You can't do that. That's not fair. I let her stew. Because here's what everyone in that car didn't realize. Grandpa Arthur had not just left me assets, he left me authority. Authority over decisions, timing, and accountability. Victoria had inherited visible wealth, but I held the levers. And the irony was deliciously slow. That evening, after my parents and sister had left, I called Martin Hale. The lawyer's voice was calm over the line. Are you ready for the operational briefing? He asked. Yes, I said. He outlined everything. Each asset, each stake, each conditional clause. Every trust fund tied to Victoria's lifestyle now fell under my discretion. He explained the reasoning behind the layered holding companies, the subsidiary structures, the clauses that prevented unilateral mismanagement. Every decision I made would legally bind the estate, including Victoria's fortune. Your grandfather, Martin added, he didn't want to punish her. He wanted to protect the legacy. He knew you could handle it. I closed my eyes for a moment. That's when it hit me. The entire humiliation of the will reading had been a test. The dollar, the laughter, the public display of favoritism, it was all designed to see if I could maintain composure under pressure, if I could exercise patience and discretion instead of lashing out. 2 days later, Victoria tried to push back. She appeared at my apartment, red-faced and furious. You don't understand. This isn't how families work. You can't just sit there and decide when I get my money. I gestured toward the dollar on my kitchen counter. I can and I will. Grandpa made the rules clear. The dollar isn't an insult, it's proof that patience wins. You think this is a game of money, but it's a game of character. Her hands shook. Mom, Dad, she's being ridiculous. My mother stayed silent this time. Diane had learned something in those past few days. Laughter and smugness don't work against a well-laid plan. And Richard? My father's composure was gone. He realized the control they thought they wielded had vanished. I made my first operational decision that night. A structured distribution schedule. No lump sums. Only monthly allowances contingent on responsible financial behavior and literacy programs. I included mandatory oversight for luxury purchases. Victoria was furious, but there was nothing she could do. Every clause in the addendum covered me. Every calculation had been approved years ago. Over the next 6 months, the shift became more evident. I oversaw the 3 office towers, and they increased in value by 7%. The medical startups were sold for a combined profit of over $9 million. My net worth quietly climbed above $22 million, while Victoria's access remained conditional. She had the lifestyle she'd always wanted, but it came at my discretion. There were moments I caught her glaring at me across the table during family dinners, the envy barely contained beneath her carefully curated smile. My parents were subdued, realizing the carefully constructed hierarchy Grandpa had designed couldn't be undone with charm or persuasion. One evening, alone in my apartment, I stared at the dollar on my desk. My mind flashed back to that day, to the laughter, to the room frozen in disbelief, to my mother's momentary panic. I understood, finally, the lesson Grandpa had embedded in that tiny piece of paper. It wasn't about money. It was about power, patience, and character. It was about standing firm when everyone else expects you to bow. The next day, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. You think you won? I stared at it. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. This wasn't about winning at all. This was about responsibility and the kind of control that could shift everything for everyone in that room. Because the moment Grandpa Arthur passed, the rules of the family had changed. And no one, not Victoria, not my parents, had any idea what came next. The towers I now oversaw had appreciated in value, leases renegotiated, and one high-profile tenant signed a 10-year extension. The medical tech startups Grandpa had quietly invested in were sold for a combined $9.3 million, landing a tidy profit for Whitmore's strategic holdings. My net worth, which had been invisible to everyone else until that will reading, quietly surpassed $22 million. Victoria's world, on the other hand, was a study in frustration. She was still living a luxury lifestyle, but it was constrained, controlled, and monitored. Every request for early disbursement, every sudden shopping spree, required my approval. She had finally realized that a social media brand and 500,000 followers didn't equate to financial autonomy. My parents, meanwhile, were subdued. Diane stopped hosting her weekly social galas. Richard rarely spoke above a whisper. The family hierarchy had shifted quietly, irreversibly. One evening, as I was organizing paperwork for the holding company, I found it. A small envelope tucked inside the lining of Grandpa's second envelope. It was fragile, yellowed at the edges, and almost hidden. I opened it carefully. Inside, in Grandpa Arthur's unmistakable handwriting, was a note. Strength is quiet. Wealth is loud. Choose which one you become. I held the note, staring at the neat cursive that had always fascinated me as a child. That single line crystallized everything he had done for me. The humiliation of the will reading, the dollar, the laughter. It wasn't about belittling me. It was a test of character, of patience, of how I would react when everything seemed unfair. He had prepared me to inherit more than money. He had prepared me to inherit control, responsibility, and the wisdom to wield both without letting pride or revenge guide me. Victoria never acknowledged it, of course. But I noticed subtle changes. She started showing up for financial literacy courses I mandated. She begrudgingly respected the distribution schedules. Slowly, painfully, she realized that control was more important than flashiness, and obedience, in a sense, could be empowering when it came with understanding. My parents tried one last maneuver, suggesting I share my newfound authority with Victoria, framing it as generosity. I smiled quietly. It's already shared, I told them. You just don't have a say in how it's used. They understood immediately. The lesson Grandpa had embedded into the structure of the will wasn't just for me, it was for all of them, if they were willing to see it. I kept the dollar. It sits on my desk under a small glass frame. Not as a trophy, not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder that patience, composure, and quiet strength often outlast loud laughter, brash claims, and empty applause. The dollar, once a cruel joke, had become a monument to strategy and resilience. Looking back, the scene in that law office feels almost cinematic. The applause for Victoria. The smirk on my mother's face. The hush when the lawyer produced the second envelope. Every gesture, every word, every pause had been orchestrated to reveal who I was, who my family was, and who my grandfather believed I could become. And in the end, the lesson was clear. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Being overlooked, dismissed, or mocked gives you the space to see the real opportunities, to prepare in silence, and to act with precision when the time comes. I've never been the type to boast, but I've also never been one to be fooled again. Grandpa Arthur understood that life isn't about winning in the way most people define it. It's about understanding the rules, waiting for the right moment, and then using what you've learned to make the lasting impact. Victoria sent me another text recently. You think you've won? I stared at it for a moment, smiled, and replied simply, I didn't need to win. I just needed to see clearly. That was the truth. And so, if you've ever been handed a dollar in a moment where you expected applause, remember this. What looks like a slight might be a doorway. What seems like a test might be the key to your future. And sometimes, the smallest envelope, the quietest gesture, or the most overlooked asset carries more power than the loudest proclamation in the room. Because in the end, wealth is visible. Control is invisible. And character? Character is everything. The laughter stopped that day, but the lessons echoed far longer. And for the first time in my life, my family wasn't laughing at me, they were listening.